Hello and welcome to Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics, the podcast where we are taking a look through Walt Disney's so-called animated classics, judging each film on its own merits to see which ones really hold up to that lofty title, albeit in our case, a more refined, more exclusive Waly Gisnep animated classic. As always, I am Liam and I am joined by my very good friend Ben. Ben, which film is up for consideration this time?
This week, Liam, we are looking at 2010's Tangled, which is an important film for a lot of reasons, not least because it is in some ways for Tangled that the idea of an animated classic was created, as they really wanted to list Tangled as the 50th example of an animated classic. So it's very much this film that we have to thank for the concept of Waly Gisnep's animated classics.
And we at Waly Gisnep are especially thankful for Tangled making it so that we had to review all 6 of the package feature films.
But we won't hold that against Tangled.
I might.
I just hear Johnny Fedora whenever I see it. So as always, we will be talking a little bit about the background of this film, going through the plot of Tangled, deciding who we think is the sexiest character in this film before finally making a decision as to whether we think it's worthy of being added to our list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. So Liam, what's your background with this film?
This feels like a film I didn't watch for ages, but considering I was told about it and shown it during university, I suppose it must have been like 2011, 2012, which is only 1 or 2 years after it came out. And I think this is the film that really turned me towards revisiting Disney films as an adult, rather than just dismissing them as kids' films to be enjoyed only by kids. And I think that a large part of my hesitancy to watch this film when it came out, other than, being I'm a cool 20-year-old, I don't do Disney films anymore, was mostly the marketing. I cannot think of a film that has more obnoxious and, frankly, as it turns out, more misleading marketing in the animated classics than Tangled. So if you're not entirely sure what I mean by this marketing, just look up the poster, and it is still the poster for Tangled that they use in promotional material. And it paints a very, very different type of film than the film we actually ended up with, because it mostly revolves around the character of Rapunzel, who in early drafts and in the early teaser for this film was a lot more of what I would describe as like a girl boss character. Very much 50-year-old white men writing what they believe feminism is and what they think a, quote, strong female character is, i.e. she has to be physically capable and emotionally closed off and hard and sort of no nonsense, which I don't know why that is always the go-to, because that's not what people mean when they say they want more strong female characters, but hey-ho, it's what 50-year-old white executives keep giving us.
I mean, you've kind of answered your own question there of, this is what 50-year-old white men think it is. I don't know why we keep getting this. Yeah, I remember that trailer, and that's when the film, I believe, was still called Rapunzel. They later changed it to Tangled because they wanted to get away from the idea of it being a princess film, which I can kind of see in some ways. I also think this is very much a Disney princess film. It's probably the most clear example of that since Beauty and the Beast, to be honest. Not that that's a criticism at all, as you know, I think very highly of Beauty and the Beast.
Shall we talk about the name then?
Let's do.
I'm going to start by saying I get the criticism, and I think that those critics are basically right. This is very much a marketing ploy to move away from, Disney is a studio that makes princess films for little girls. This isn't about Rapunzel. Look, we've got a man in this film, and he's also a lead character. So it's not right to call the film just Rapunzel, because it's not just her story. And it's weird because I do agree with both sides. I think that the studio is right in that it is Flynn's film as well. And in that regard, I actually really like the name Tangled as a play on, it's about hair, but also it's two people coming together and intertwining and going on an adventure. I think I resent that almost every Disney film since has been like, right, every film needs a one-word snappy title.
But to be fair, Moana's called Moana, it's not called Waves.
Moana should be called Waves. I would...
Just so we're all clear, I said that because she's at sea, but also that's a pun on hair as well. I just want everyone to appreciate that.
Weirdly enough, I hadn't noticed it was a hair pun as well.
It was too good. Too good a pun.
So I don't think the film had to be called Rapunzel. I think that the studio's excuse is a actually perfectly valid excuse, and this isn't just a film for little girls where maybe the marketing under the name Rapunzel might lead to that, and frankly that's more of a societal issue that we need to deal with, and maybe it would be nice for Disney to release a film called Rapunzel and find other ways to encourage young boys to see it and be interested and be like, hey, you can be interested in a princess film that's called Rapunzel. But that is a much wider and bigger issue. My issue is that I just miss multiple part titles like The Princess and the Frog.
On the subject of gender appeal, I'd be curious, and I don't know if there's really a way of measuring this, but what the gender appeal of, say, Raya and the Last Dragon was compared to Tangled, because whilst the two main characters in that film, the three main characters in that film are all female, I think because that's trying to be a martial arts action film more than it is anything else, certainly more than it's trying to be a princess film, I'd be curious to see whether the appeal was there and whether it was a genre factor more than just having female characters in it.
That is a really interesting point that I hadn't considered, that it's less about protagonist gender and more about genre. And really, when we're talking about princess films, we're talking about fairy tales. Because Beauty and the Beast, whilst regarded as a princess film, really isn't by many metrics. It's very much a fairy tale still. And what I love about that film is not only are our two protagonists in the title, we do have two protagonists in that film. I know we start the film with Belle, but it is very much Beast's story. And I think they have very much equal weighting in that film, which is not necessarily the case in Tangled.
So I think we've established, Liam, if nothing else, your ideal Disney title is the two protagonists, right? So it's Beauty and the Beast, Princess and the Frog, Raya and the Last Dragon. So by that logic, your preferred title for this film would be Thief and the Abductee.
Yes. There's got to be a play on the thief and the cobbler. Is there any word to do with hair that is remotely similar to cobbler?
Give me about 4 hours and I will come up with something.
Because yeah, Aladdin is just called Aladdin and apparently that's fine. Whereas again, it's very much a story with two protagonists. So maybe Disney should have stuck to their guns and gone with Rapunzel. But I do like the acknowledgement that it's not just her story, even if it is a cheap marketing ploy to get little boy bums in little boy seats.
I think the marketing probably was key because when this film came out, I was really into film in general. So I used to read a lot of film magazines. I was part of Love Film. This was the point in my life when I was really just trying to watch as many different films as possible. And I remember reading the apparent budget for this film, and it's a number that's been ingrained in my memory because it's so obscene. And it was $260 million, which is an insane amount today. Like, that's more than most Avengers films cost to make. And this was in the late noughties. Now, I suspect a lot of that went into developing software and the computer side of it. This was clearly a film that Disney spent a long time making. I think it was first pitched in sort of 2001. But still, that is an obscene amount of money.
I'm just going to say it. I think at least 10% of the budget went towards the hair. Like, developing that technology was key for this film.
I can believe that, for sure.
So should we dive in then? And we're going to play a nice little game for the duration of this podcast, which is called Liam is a Hypocrite Bingo. So get out your bingo cards for your first stamp because, oh boy, I actually really enjoy the opening narration of this film.
Well, what we open with then is Flynn Rider. Oh, of course we don't know it's him yet, narrating the film, saying this is the story of how he died. He says it in a very dramatic way and then immediately goes into a jokey, light-hearted narration about a single drop that fell from heaven and a magic flower grew and an evil old woman found it and used it to stay young.
What a wonderful fairy tale premise. I've missed fairy tales at this point, and it's beautiful, it's unique, it's so charming. Love the opening premise of the drop of sun falling to the earth and growing a flower.
Tangled I think very much is an evolution from Bolt in that it's a proof of concept, although I think it's a lot further along than just being a proof of concept. I think Bolt, they were trying to show we can do a classic Disney animal world story in CGI for a modern audience. And this is Disney going, we can also do our other main type of story, the fairy tale story. But the parallels here with those other Disney fairy tales are strong, and I think they're deliberate. The obvious one here is with Beauty and the Beast, which also opens with a narration, which also explains basically the only magical element in the film, which obviously in Beauty and the Beast is the curse. In this is the magic flower.
Beauty and the Beast is a really good comparison for my next point, though, which is just that whilst I really enjoy the opening narration, it could have been done better. It's very, very dense, like a lot of plot happens. Basically, the flower grows, the woman hoards its power for herself to stay young forever. Eventually, a kingdom grows. The queen is ill and is going to die during childbirth. And unlike the rest of the people in the kingdom, everyone's willing to bend over backwards to make sure that doesn't happen. So they go searching for the flower.
They specifically say Mother Gothel, who is the old lady, Flynn specifically says she didn't share the flower, which makes her evil. Unlike the king and queen, who tear it out of the soil and use it to cure one person. Like, what's the difference? If anything, the king and queen are worse, because it's dead now.
Yeah, but they're royalty. They're entitled to that.
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot that.
So they tear it out the ground, make some tea from it, which was not needed. We've seen that you can just sing to the flower, which, that's a point. How did Gothel learn about the singing? Is the singing even necessary?
So a lot of people point this out as a plot hole, that Gothel has this little song that she sings, and Rapunzel sings it later as well, and that's what activates the abilities of the flower. I don't think this is that big a plot hole. I've heard some people think it's to do with the intention, so like the intention when they're making the tea is the same. I've heard some people say that Gothel had a long time to experiment with the flower to see what it responded to. My reading of it was always this was like some sort of like prayer or chant that this culture or Gothel's culture had, that this was like a mythical flower, so this was just kind of known that this was the song you sing to it. Or, don't worry about it.
Yeah, I like to lean more into the intent pretty much any time you have spell casting. I think it was a Chuck Palahniuk book, Lullaby, I think, which is kind of about a spell, and the point it makes is that the words are a focus of intention and you actually don't need the words, which leads to a comedic sort of segment towards the end where he is inadvertently, just by thinking about the spell, just killing people as he walks through the street. Like, he's trying not to, but in thinking about it. And it's like, okay, so spells are about intent. I know I raised it as a bit of a joke, but like, I don't mind the singing to the flower at all. It is just about intent to me.
I don't think it would be a better film if Flynn Rider said, it didn't matter what you sang as long as the intent was right, and Gothel just went, and then became young.
So the selfish king and queen have ripped the flower up, they've used it to save the queen, and a princess is born with beautiful golden hair, and Gothel finds out about this. She breaks into the palace and tries taking some of the hair for herself, but she notices that when she cuts the hair, it loses its power. So she goes to the next logical step by just stealing the baby.
It's always a good next logical step.
And so we have the setup of our film. We've got a missing princess, a kingdom in mourning, who every year on the princess's birthday will light these lanterns and set them up into the air, hoping that it will bring her back. And that's our setup. I think there's a lot that happens. It's nowhere near as elegant as the stained glass window in Beauty and the Beast. It's also not as fantastical. I think the stained glass is always going to be the gold standard, and to compare things to it, it's always going to be an unfavourable comparison. But you can have fun with those things and be creative. I think of Moana with the grandmother telling the story of Maui and using the imagery, and it's a really simple story told in a very creative way. And I do think this opening narration is missing that. It's very efficient, but what they do instead is they kind of lean into the character of Flynn Rider to enhance a very wordy opening. So I do quite like it.
We then cut forwards to 18 years later or thereabouts, when Rapunzel is a young woman and she's stuck in a tower, and her only friend is a little chameleon called Pascal. Now, I always feel obliged to point out every opportunity, chameleons don't change their colour to blend in with their environment. I'm happy for it to be a device in this film. I just need everyone to know, this is my PSA, that's not how chameleons work. Back to the fun.
I mean, I'll take that as a shorthand over a scene where Pascal is walking in the sun and one side of him is dark and the other side is white. And Flynn's like, oh, why is that doing that?
Complex evolutionary reasons. So what do you make of the character of Rapunzel in this film?
You said that Tangled is very much a Disney princess film, and my word if Rapunzel isn't very much a Disney princess. Right out from the gate, it's as if you asked a group of 5-year-olds, and they may well have done with a focus group, to come up with a new Disney princess. There's some issues I do have where she is innately good, which is always going to be a common theme of the Disney princesses, where there's just something about them that makes them a good person. Whereas, obviously, we know there's no such thing really as a good person. Everyone is just a product of their circumstance. And my word if Rapunzel hasn't had some awful circumstances, and despite that is still just a beaming, happy and optimistic person.
If you want to feel particularly guilty about how inactive you've been during lockdown, watch the opening sequence of this film where Rapunzel has learned to make candles, play chess, she's learned ballet, all by herself in a tower where she only has 3 books and a chameleon.
Yeah, I always forget how much When Will My Life Begin makes me feel incredibly inadequate.
All by the age of 18 as well.
I think it's a wonderful introduction to the character, though. Also have to mention we have Alan Menken returning to score the film and write its songs alongside lyrics by Glenn Slater. And I really like what they went for with this film. It's a lot poppier at times, but, well, is it just this opening song that's poppier? Because we've got a proper Broadway number coming up. We've got kind of a ragtime folk number a bit later. So maybe it is just this opening that's particularly poppy, but it's more a case of like, this is what would suit the character. And I think it does it really well.
I think a big part of it is the vocal performance. We have Mandy Moore voicing Rapunzel, and I think again this sets the template for a lot of the films we've got coming up. The phrase I'd use for the sound, particularly When Will My Life Begin, but I think more generally with the music in this, is I'd describe it as Disney Channel-esque. I think it really sounds a lot more High School Musical than it does Broadway.
I'd say you've hit the nail on the head with that there. I think that's a really good comparison. The more High School Musical of the time, I think, really even. I think 3 had just been in cinemas or something. They were long out of high school by this point, but, you know. I don't even know how those films work. Are they seniors in the first year? No, I think they must be freshmen.
If it's not animated, Liam, I'm not watching it. The thing that stands out for me with Rapunzel, and this is the obvious thing, but as we mentioned, the hair. The idea of Rapunzel as a character, that's her defining trait, but they have so much fun with Rapunzel's hair in this film. The one thing I'll give them a huge amount of credit for is they don't take the easy option. So very late on in this film, Rapunzel gets her hair tied up so it's not dragging behind her. But for the vast majority of the film, she has this huge length of hair which she either has to carry, or it's flowing behind her, or it gets caught on stuff. She's using it as a rope, a swing. They do a million different things with it. It always looks great, and it's always a creative way to have this character have energy within a scene.
There have been numerous times during this podcast where we've discussed the merits of traditional 2D animation versus the merits of computer-based 3D animation. And I'm quite happy to say that I do not think they could have done the character of Rapunzel justice in 2D animation. I think this is something that is really celebrated with computer animation and what they can do with the hair. There's another point I love in this opening number with the animation, which is just when Rapunzel is painting, the paint looks absolutely gorgeous. Again, something I don't think they could have done justice to in 2D animation, which is something where they could have used actual paint. But the relief on it and the texture and the way it settles on the wall, it just looks amazing. And I compare this to only 5 years earlier with Chicken Little and the horrible texture everywhere.
Meanwhile, back at the kingdom, we see 3 criminals breaking in to steal a crown. One, voiced by Zachary Levi, and the fantastically named Stabbington brothers, voiced by Ron Perlman.
I did not realise they were voiced by Ron Perlman until this most recent rewatch. I say they, I think only one of them speaks. But either way, we finally got Ron Perlman in a Disney film. They've been at him for years, ever since Aliens, being like, Ron,
Do you want to voice an uptight clock? Not really. Now, I've made a note here that this castle must be infamously easy to steal from, because at 3 separate points in this film, someone breaks into this castle and steals something from it. Now, I'd argue that this should be the easiest possible place to defend, because it's a castle town surrounded by the sea, or a giant lake at least, and there is one very thin bridge that you can get in or out of. If you put one guard on that bridge, no one would escape.
I mean, you say that, but that's basically the Imperial City from Oblivion, and people are constantly escaping from that place. I say people, one person is constantly escaping over and over.
So they steal the crown, run into the forest.
Can I just say there is something incredibly vulgar about 10 guards guarding a crown? It just feels a bit too bougie for my liking.
I have a lot of notes about the justice system in this world. But we will come to that later, I promise. So Flynn and the Stabbington brothers see that they are already marked as wanted men, which I suppose means they were already wanted prior to this crime. I'll go back to the point I made in The Rescuers Down Under. I don't see the benefit of putting wanted posters up in the forest, because who's going to see them?
The one film it would have made sense in is the one film it didn't happen in, which is Robin Hood.
Very good point. At least Rapunzel's dad at the end of the film doesn't say, "I now have an outlaw for an in-law."
Talking about the wanted posters, there's a recurring joke here that I quite like, and I'm not sure if it's just personally designed just for me.
Yes, I think that's the most obvious explanation, that it's personally designed for
I
you.
assumed as much. The idea is that in all of Flynn Rider's wanted posters, the noses are just completely wrong. They just can never get his nose right. And I wonder whether this is a joke that came from the now infamous hot guy meeting that the studio had for the character creation of Flynn, where I'm really not sure how okay this is, but Disney basically just got in as many of their female employees that they could and said, can you bring pictures of men you find attractive? And we're going to just try and cram them all into one super hot guy. And they spent hours talking about like what makes people attractive. And I like to think that this joke arose from the fact that no one could decide on the nose.
Presumably during this, some of the women said, I'm not attracted to men. And then the senior producers said, what are you talking about? All people are heterosexual. We know this from Disney films.
Well, there's another point from that where all the examples I could see that they listed, it was things like David Beckham, and it's just overwhelmingly white people, which I found a bit weird. And I get this, and I'm glad Disney has kind of moved away from it, but when you're set in a fantasy world, it does not have to be European white people, which is always the shorthand for high fantasy. But the whole concept of a fantasy world is that, hey, if there's magic here, I'm pretty sure there could be a few black people too. Yeah,
you used the phrase overwhelmingly white to describe the men they were talking about, and that's also an excellent description of this film. Even the horse is white.
Like, there's been some attempts to address this. I know Frozen 2 has some characters of colour, even though there were none in the first one, which people criticised, but it's like, hey, you're introducing new characters, they can be anything. And obviously you've got films like Moana, but Moana is set based around a specific culture that actually exists, i.e. Polynesia. But Tangled, people say, oh, well, it's vaguely based on medieval Europe, and it's like, it's just fantasy. I was actually wondering whether, the upcoming Lord of the Rings Amazon series is going to do anything about this, because I believe the Lord of the Rings films are overwhelmingly, if not exclusively, white cast members. And hey, that's the ultimate fantasy world. They can be anything. And I'm wondering whether, because the films exist, they're going to make that restriction in the TV series, or they're going to, be like, hey, we're just going to cast whoever is the best for this role. Just a quick aside. Point is this film is 10 years old now at this point, and I'm glad we've moved on from fantasy means overwhelmingly, if not exclusively, white. There's one for your woke bingo cards. Haven't had those for a while.
I feel it's only a matter of time before someone who's very anti-woke discovers this podcast and we get a lot of hate.
Someone who is extremely alt-right but loves Tangled.
So, moving on with the plot. So, we see a relationship between Rapunzel and who she calls Mother, Gothel, the old lady from the opening. And Gothel is just emotionally abusive towards Rapunzel. I don't really know how to describe it. She gaslights her and undermines her. There's a bit where she looks in the mirror with them both and says, I see a strong, confident young woman. Oh, look, and you're there as well. She's just horrible. But Rapunzel's pretty nice towards her, given she's the only human being she knows. I mean, as far as she knows, she's the only human being other than herself who exists.
It's a strange line to follow up with after you've just been very clear about how Gothel is a terrible, terrible person, but I really like the character of Gothel. I think this is one of my favourite Disney villains because she's so grounded and real. Many, many people will interact with, if not have been raised by emotionally abusive narcissists. And I'm really glad Disney just made a villain that is just that. That is a real person that exists in this world. This isn't a sorcerer wanting to become the most powerful being on the planet. This is just a very, very selfish person who is emotionally abusive. And I think they handled it incredibly well, and I think it's really well done, mostly down to the performance from Donna Murphy, who is incredibly likeable as this terrible person. And those really horrible lines, as you say, oh look, you're there too, are obviously it's written as very cutting, but it's played so comedically because, hey, that's what narcissists do. They play everything off as a joke. But the point is when everything is repeated to you and played off as a joke, it gets to you and it wears you down. And they nailed it with Gothel.
I also like that what she wants is really, really simple. She wants to stay young forever, and she wants to use Rapunzel to do that. Later in the film, when their hideout is compromised, her plan is take her somewhere else and just keep doing the same thing. We've had villains that either have quite boring motivations of, rule the world, power, loads of money, or they just have motivations that are a bit ill-defined, or the motivation is crush the dreams of a small orphan boy. But I like that Gothel's, it's pure narcissism. It's so simple, and in some ways, if Gothel could do this without Rapunzel, that would be her preference. Clearly, when she goes to steal the hair, she doesn't want Rapunzel in her life. She just wants to be left alone and be young and beautiful, but because she needs Rapunzel for that, she's happy to ruin Rapunzel's life for it. It's almost indicative of Lady Tremaine in Cinderella, where it's about a very simple relationship where one person has power and one person doesn't. And because of that, this person's life gets ruined.
That's such a good comparison. I'd completely forgotten about Lady Tremaine, but just saying it now, I remember when we talked about it, how much I loved that character because it's so simple, so grounded, and so real, which is really cool of Disney to put in kids' films. Like, kids can deal with over-the-top and ridiculous, scary plots like witches eating children, and I can't think of any other plots. It's just witches eating children, but children can deal with the ridiculous and the absurd and the horrifying if it's on a grand scale. But as I said, like, there'll be many kids who will be in relationships like this, and I think that's really cool of Disney to do, to be like, hey, these people exist and this is not okay.
I know a lot of people read into the relationship between Gothel and Rapunzel. I've seen discussions where people say, do they think Gothel actually cares about Rapunzel? They have this little exchange where he says, I love you more, I love you most. And that's kind of their little thing. I feel very confident saying Gothel doesn't give a damn about Rapunzel and is a sociopath who's excellent at portraying love. But I think Rapunzel genuinely cares about Gothel, and she certainly doesn't want anything bad to happen to her.
In regards to the I love you scene, I've seen point out as well that Gothel is specifically talking to the hare and she kisses the hare, which is obviously not what she's doing, but it's a good cinematic shorthand of like, look, she doesn't love Rapunzel, she loves what Rapunzel is to her. It's a very possessive type of love because she's a selfish narcissist, and she does love Rapunzel, but in the way that people selfishly do love things they possess.
And of course, Gothel's crowning moment is her own song, which we get a couple of versions of throughout the film, which is Mother Knows Best, which again is just gaslighting and emotional abuse the song, other than everything Frollo sings, obviously.
I have missed Broadway stars belting because, my word, Donna Murphy can belt. This song is so much fun. And get your hypocrite bingo card back out because I love the Black Void. I'm not sure if it is lazy shorthand, and they were like, this musical number's going to take place in a Black Void, but thematically, I think it works really well that Gothel is trying to scare Rapunzel, and she is popping in and out of the shadows, and she's using the shadows, and she's just terrifying and gaslighting Rapunzel in a song, and it's wonderful.
I'm going to say, I think the reason you're okay with this void sequence is because the lighting is so superb, and they do so much with shadows being cast and lights being lit and extinguished, and it looks so dynamic. It doesn't look like flat characters existing on a black background.
That's the thing, it's a void used purposefully and to effect, not we'll insert something here later.
I just want to point out, and I don't really have any critical feedback on this, but the second Mother Knows Best, where she says, skip the drama, stay with Mama, and then just does this ridiculous delivery of the line. I'll put it in.
Skip the drama, stay with Mama. Mother knows best.
It's great.
As I said, Donna Murphy is just fantastic. I wonder how much of the character came from her and her casting, or if they were like, this is the person who's going to play this role, so we can write, not a genie situation, obviously, but just great Broadway superstar.
The person I saw this film with said she felt the character of Gothel was visually designed around Cher, because Cher doesn't age.
Oh, I love that. What this was all about was, it's Rapunzel's 18th birthday coming up, and she is getting ready to ask Gothel for her birthday. She just wants to see the floating lights, because every single year on her birthday, the lanterns are set loose, and she sees them and she's like, I just want to know what they are. And thus we have our want of the film. And similar to Gothel's want of just wanting to stay young and beautiful forever, Rapunzel also has an incredibly simple want, which is just like, I just want to find out what these lanterns are, and I want to see them because they mean something to me, because they happen on my birthday.
Now for me, this is the big plot hole of the film. Why does Gothel, A, tell Rapunzel that her birthday is on the same day as the floating lights, and B, explain the concept of birthdays to Rapunzel at all?
I get this. I will say that to me, the lanterns are absolutely genius, because in the production of this film, they really struggled with how to give Rapunzel a plot. The plot of Rapunzel is that a princess is kept captive and she's rescued. As soon as she's out the tower, the story's over. But obviously here, the story is instead that she needs to get away from Gothel. And how do you do that once she's out of the tower? And also, how do you get her out the tower that's not away from Gothel? And the writers sat down with this problem, and a day later they came up with the solution of, let's have the lanterns. Let's have something that is calling to Rapunzel, and it's something that she can go out of the tower to find while still being under the control of Gothel. And then the story is more about that instead. And I think it's wonderful, because I think a film in which Rapunzel was just stuck in a tower for 90 minutes would not be great.
I mean, that's a horror film or a thriller.
Rapunzel by Jordan Peele.
I also like that Rapunzel's main drive isn't a person. She's not seen a handsome prince she wants to go and find or whatever, or she's read a fairy tale in a book. Not that there's anything wrong with those motivations for past Disney princesses, but yeah, I much prefer this. I think it's a lot simpler. So Gothel goes out to gather supplies and tells Rapunzel she can never ask to leave the tower again. Meanwhile, Flynn Rider is having a dramatic action chase with the Royal Guards and the Royal Guards' horse, an incredibly serious horse called Maximus, who just hates crime. I don't really know what else to say about Maximus. He's a very serious horse.
He's the Batman of horses.
I was going to say that! Bat horse. I also think one of the things that really works about both Maximus and Pascal in this film, they don't talk. They're very anthropomorphic, they're very expressive, but they don't talk, and I think it was absolutely the right call for both of those characters.
Yep, I'm quite happy to say that Maximus is my favourite Disney horse, and Pascal is my favourite Disney animal sidekick.
I thought you were going to say favourite Disney chameleon.
Well, by extension, I suppose he is. Yeah, they've got so much personality without having to talk. I don't think we've seen this success since Abu. Like, I know who the character of Abu is by watching Aladdin, and he doesn't say a word. I mean, we saw it with Mika and Dog in Pocahontas. Like, they don't talk, but they're awful.
Did you say Mika and Dog?
Yeah.
I think the raccoon's called Miko. I can't remember what the dog's called.
Oh, so you're laughing at me getting the name Miko wrong, not the
Well, I was laughing at you not knowing the dog's name, but I realise I don't know it either.
Yeah, just incredibly strong characters. Maximus is ridiculous and so physical. He is a formidable opponent for Flynn in this chase sequence. It's quite comedic and maybe a bit too fantastical, but in a series in which we've seen things like Pegasus, like, I think this is a perfectly fine Disney horse, and as I say, my favourite.
So Flynn manages to escape during this sequence. He also ditches the Stabbington brothers, betraying them and running off with the crown. He manages to outrun some of the horses. As we know, you can outrun a horse when you really need to. But it ends with him and Maximus getting separated, and eventually Flynn stumbles across the hidden tower, climbs up it using arrows as crampons, and is promptly knocked out by Rapunzel using her frying pan.
My word, Flynn is athletic.
I know, right? They have those at the climbing wall where it's like the pegs that you put in and you just climb with your arm weight. That's really hard to do.
I really enjoy that this meet cute, and yes, this is a meet cute because, surprise, surprise, this is actually a romantic comedy. I really enjoy that this meet cute involves one of the characters getting knocked out with a frying pan. And I don't know if you've ever used or held a cast iron frying pan, but Flynn should be dead.
I mean, I've used one, but not for that purpose. He certainly should be heavily bruised, particularly after Rapunzel just abuses his unconscious body by repeatedly throwing it into a wardrobe.
I love the wardrobe bit. I never realised until this time watching it just how perfect the comedic timing is in it. So it's just a fixed shot of a side view of a wardrobe, and Rapunzel is repeatedly trying to get Flynn's unconscious body into it, and he keeps falling out, and you've just got the hard cuts. Once the punchline of him falling out has happened, hard cut to her trying to put him in again. It's just perfectly timed. It's so well done.
This gives Rapunzel a sudden burst of confidence that she's managed to deal with one of these ferocious, terrifying men that Gothel has told her all about. And on Gothel returning, Rapunzel is about to say that she's managed to do this, but Gothel just snaps and is horrible to her. The facade completely drops, and Rapunzel realises that Gothel's never going to trust her or have that level of confidence in her. She instead asks Gothel to go on a long journey to get some seashells for her paints, knowing that this will give her time to execute her rapidly put together plan, which is basically to strong-arm Flynn Rider into taking her to see the floating lights and to return her to the tower before Gothel gets back.
Yeah, I think this is a really solid setup to our second act. We've got Gothel out the tower. After some negotiation, Flynn has agreed to take Rapunzel on this journey, albeit reluctantly, and he's always looking for a way out. And so we see Rapunzel leave the tower for what is very clearly the first time in her life. And it's such a wonderful moment where she's hanging just above the grass, and she drops her foot, touches the grass, and just bursts back into song, a reprise of When Will My Life Begin. And we get these lovely panning shots as she sings. It's very, very Disney when she runs into the clearing and birds are flying around her, and we just get this huge pan around her. And Mandy Moore is fantastic in this bit. It's just wonderful. And then hard cut to Rapunzel being horrified that she's done this and completely torn that she's betrayed her mother and she's clearly the worst person, and a nice little sequence of it going back and forth between that.
Flynn's very keen to try and manipulate this to his advantage, so Rapunzel will let him out of their deal and return the crown that he stole to him, which she has hidden somewhere in the tower and he's unable to find, which is the leverage she's using over him. And they set out on their adventure. Gothel bumps into Maximus, realises that there's something amiss, rushes back to the tower and sees Rapunzel's gone. So we've kind of got this extended chase where Gothel's after Rapunzel, Maximus and the royal guards are after Flynn, and both Rapunzel and Flynn are on their way to see the floating lights.
I just want to comment about Gothel returning to the tower, because I think this is so well executed. The lighting is completely different. She's in a complete panic, and when Rapunzel doesn't let down her hair to let her up, she gets really worried, and then we see the back of the tower where she has blocked the entryway, and it just tells you so much about this character. She's so paranoid and just wants to be left alone, and she doesn't want anyone to take this magic away from her, that she's locked herself in a tower. Makes me wonder how she got in and out before the hair was, 100 feet long. There must have been a point where Rapunzel was aware of the entryway.
Maybe they had a rope. I mean, they probably could have carried on using the rope.
No, she's an abusive narcissist.
That's true.
Which does lead to one of my favourite lines, which is Gothel telling Rapunzel, "Oh, I don't know how you do that every day, it must be exhausting." And when Rapunzel responds, "Oh, it's okay," Gothel just responds with, "Then I don't know why it takes so long."
So passive-aggressive.
It's wonderful, and as I've said, so much of it is down to Donna Murphy's performance. So yeah, we have Flynn and Rapunzel, who Flynn noticing that Rapunzel is torn and really not wanting to go back to the city that he is a wanted criminal in, thinks of an out saying, "You know what, let's go get lunch. You look like you could use some food and a break to just think things over." And so takes her to a lovely little pub called the Snuggly Duckling, which is filled with the very ruffians and barbarians that Rapunzel is completely terrified of bumping into.
What promptly happens is they recognise Flynn from his wanted poster, and there's a big scuffle as all these ruffians fight to claim Flynn for themselves so they can claim the bounty. Rapunzel interrupts this by explaining that she needs him to fulfill a dream and asking, "Haven't you ever had a dream?" And then we get a very sharp turn into the song "I've Got a Dream," which is just a series of terrifying barbarians singing about what they want from life and all the nice things they want, which are mostly around crafts, I'm going to be honest.
So if I had one criticism of this bit, so first of all, I find this bit hilarious. I can't help it. It's overtly comedic, but in a way that really works as far as comic relief side characters are. As I always say, you dive into the plot and then you dive right back out. Whereas I feel many other films would have kept a couple of barbarians around for the duration and joined the team, and I don't want that. But if I had one criticism of this sequence, it's that all of the dreams are, for the most part, particularly feminine, and I think that's the joke, that you've got the contrast of these big masculine barbarians and they all have feminine dreams. And whilst I will always support normalising that kind of breakdown of gender roles, it feels like the normalisation of the breakdown of gender roles here is played as a joke. The joke is that this barbarian likes baking, and it's like,
I suppose if one of their dreams was, "I want to kill 200 people," it's not going to put Flynn and Rapunzel at ease, is it?
It's more that I think they could have had a few less feminine ones also thrown in there that are also, quite wholesome dreams.
I want to be the greatest swimmer ever.
I want to write the great American novel. Not that that's particularly gendered at all, sorry. Didn't want to imply that only men can write the great American novel.
I think they really have their cake and eat it in this sequence, because they are doing a big, fun Disney music number, and they've also got Flynn Rider just being cynical about the whole thing and saying he doesn't sing and looking grumpy and saying how silly it is. They're really going both ways on this.
I mentioned in the Princess and the Frog episode that the overarching theme of the Disney revival is self-awareness and kind of pointed jabs at Disney itself, which can often come across as quite cynical. And before going into this film, I was worried that that element of Flynn's character would irritate me now that we're, 12 years into the Disney revival. And we've seen things like Dwayne Johnson talking about tweets and calling Moana a princess. And, Kristoff pointing out that you can't marry someone you've just met. All of these very pointed jabs at traditional Disney. And Flynn very much serves that role in this film. But I think I'm okay with it with Flynn because it's very much his character. As we'll learn shortly, he wants to be this dashing gentleman thief. And he's very much putting on airs all the time and playing a performance. And his cynicism is part of his character. And yeah, it's, as you say, it's having your cake and eating it too, because you can make pointed jabs at Disney and it be, relevant to the character. But ultimately, we have a cynical man in the background looking at dancing rats and raising his eyebrows and surprised at all these barbarians singing. And when they even turn to him, he's like, I don't sing. Though it's a perfect setup for brilliant punchline, which is him actually singing at knife point. And it's my favourite verse of the whole song.
I have a couple of other notes on this sequence. One is the weird little creepy bearded man. You should probably just arrest him. I don't care if he's not done anything specific. I wouldn't trust him.
That weird, creepy little bearded man is voiced by the wonderful Paul F. Tompkins, and I love him. Again, another great line is from him when Gothel shows up afterwards and he walks out of the inn, clearly very inebriated, still singing the song.
Sort of singing the song. Singing a song.
And sees Gothel and says, somebody get me a glass, because I just found me a tall drink of water. And all delivered in this very slurred, ridiculous style from Paul F. Tompkins.
This character is probably about 100, is only ever seen wearing his pants, and is about 1.5 feet tall. The other note I've got is that if you ever want to try and break up a very tense, aggressive situation in a pub in real life, you can also do it by singing, as long as the song is 3 lines.
I enjoy the end of this sequence where one of the barbarians who'd went to get the guards breaks in and is like, I found the guards. And obviously everyone in the pub has decided to let them go instead now because they've been won over by Rapunzel's talk of dreams. And so Brad Garrett leads them to the back of, character voiced by Brad Garrett, leads them to the back of the inn and shows them a trapdoor exit. And it's like, go, follow your dreams. And Flynn responds with, I will. Just to be met with, not you, your dream stinks. I was talking to her. It's wonderful. The whole sequence is very Disney Revival, but it's not obnoxious. Bit of a spoiler to how I feel about most of the Disney Revival.
And we also get another layer of the drama added. So the Stabbington brothers have been arrested, and Maximus is reunited with the captain of the guard, and they chase after Flynn and Rapunzel down the tunnel. The guy who's clearly the newbie on the guards team is left to guard the Stabbington brothers, who are twice as tall and 10 times as big as him. They immediately headbutt him and break out, and then they're chasing after Flynn as well. So we've got this sort of extended chase of all these different people chasing after Rapunzel and Flynn.
I think this is a really good action sequence. I think narratively it works. We've obviously just been in a situation where we've seen Rapunzel encouraged to keep going, and she knows that her ticket is Flynn. Even though at this point, actually, at the end, she could have just been like, okay, you can all turn him in, and could someone else take me to the... And yeah, we get this chase sequence through the tunnels, which leads to this big confrontation by a dam, which ends in a similar way to the dam at the end of the Two Towers.
There's really only one way action sequences with Dam's End, really, isn't there?
That's a very good point, actually. They are the dinosaurs standing on cliffs of the architecture world.
This sequence contains my favourite Flynn line where Maximus has got a sword in his teeth and is swinging it and having a sword fight while Flynn fights back with a frying pan, and he just says, I'll have you know this is the strangest thing I've ever done. We also get some nice use of the hair again. Rapunzel's flicking it over stuff and using it to grapple and move them around the space. It's really nice, a lot of dynamic camera movement as well. Again, we're going to have a fun action sequence in this section.
In terms of dynamic camera movement, I think the surfing down the water canal, I could have done without. It felt very solar surfing at the start of Treasure Planet. We're doing this because, we need something exciting that you can see. Whereas actually the running through the tunnels and the running away from the falling pillar, they work, and the swinging with the hair, that's enough. The sliding down the canal is fine.
I'll tell you why it's in the film, Liam, is because out of context it looks great in a trailer.
That's a really good way of putting it. It is very much a trailer moment, which, I get, it's fine, but the scene works perfectly well without it. And yeah, this all culminates in Rapunzel and Flynn being trapped by a falling pillar, and they're now trapped in a small tunnel that is slowly filling with water, and they're going to drown, and they just accept this.
There's a really nice moment where Flynn tells Rapunzel that his real name is Eugene Fitzherbert. I think Rapunzel is one of the most lovable and adorable characters in Disney. She's just incredibly sweet and kind. And I know those aren't interesting characteristics. I know Snow White's sweet and kind, but in a more believable and interesting way. And I just love that after this point, she only ever calls him Eugene. Like, I find that so sweet and endearing.
There's a really nice characterization moment when he says that his real name is Eugene Fitzherbert, and he just adds the line, someone may as well know. He accepts that he's going to die, and I'm just like, Flynn is completely alone. He has no one, and that line tells it all. I just think it's really nice, and I do really enjoy, that sounds a bit sadistic, but I really enjoy how Flynn faces this death. He's very just, look, there's nothing we can do, it's done.
But of course there is something they can do, because Flynn says it's too dark for him to see a way out. Rapunzel realises she has one way of providing light, and that is by using her magic hair. So she sings, her hair lights it up, Flynn finds a way out, and they sort of get washed downstream and eventually climb out on the riverbank, wet but alive.
With Flynn absolutely terrified of the magic he has just seen, because this isn't a world in which magic really exists. And this is very much that revival element where, when Aladdin meets the genie, he's not completely, taken aback and horrified and confused by the existence of magic. He accepts it straight away.
He's horrified and confused by the weird impression.
Yeah. Whereas the hallmark of the Disney revival is if something happens that wouldn't happen in the real world, at least one character has to acknowledge it in some way. And so Flynn does that. He's very scared and confused. There's this wonderful scene where Rapunzel explains, hey, my hair doesn't just glow. Let me show you what else it does. And so she wraps her hair around his hand. I know he's scared, but he's also very accepting of this. Like, it could have done anything. And he had no choice but to find out.
My hair is great at amputating limbs.
Nice moment as well with Pascal, who, whilst Flynn is looking at the glowing hair in horror as it approaches his hand, Pascal holds his hand up and points at it just with a very smug look on his face.
Pascal is weird. I don't know what he gets out of life. During this exchange, Flynn gives a little bit more backstory. He says he was an orphan and that he just wanted to have something, which is why he's become so obsessed with wealth and stealing, and that's kind of what his motivation has been, is to kind of pull himself out of that poverty. And that's kind of the background we get with Flynn, really. He goes off to find some firewood, and Gothel comes out of the shadows to speak with Rapunzel.
I really like this exchange. It's a reprise of Mother Knows Best, where Gothel is continuing to manipulate Rapunzel. She could just take her back at this point, but she knows that if she did, she'd have Flynn after them, so she knows she needs to deal with that somehow, so she's enlisted the help of the Stabbington brothers. And it's this really simple but grand plan of manipulation where she tells Rapunzel, fine, like, if you know best, prove it. And she gives her the crown. She says, give him this back, he'll run away. And don't come crying to me when I'm proven right.
Of course, her plan is for Rapunzel to come crying to her when she's proven right, but that's not what she says.
And I really like it. And so Rapunzel takes the crown. She doesn't immediately tell Flynn. Obviously, she's a bit taken aback. She's developed feelings for Flynn, which, by the way, I have to say, I actually really like the progression of this relationship. I think it's very believable. It's quick. We've not got Beauty and the Beast levels of pacing here where X amount of time has happened and they've grown close. That's always going to be the gold standard, obviously. But it doesn't start out romantic, but obviously with what they've been through and they've opened up to each other, we start getting this hint of romantic feelings. It's at this point where that's even introduced, which I think is really good and quite restrained of Disney to do.
I really like it. I remember saying in our Aladdin podcast that it very much feels when Aladdin and Jasmine meet that they're just like, hey, this person's pretty hot. And then they kind of get to know each other and fall in love with each other. This, I think they avoid that in that Flynn tries to use his looks and his charm on Rapunzel and it doesn't work. But I don't think he's just like, wow, she's a babe, I'm going to try and win her around. And likewise, she's not, wow, this is the first man I've ever seen, I'm in love. As you say, it's not realistic in terms of the real world. But I think for a 90-minute Disney film, yeah, like, they have an organic relationship that builds and they're not just instantly attracted to each other. They get to know each other, and that's kind of what drives it.
Imagine your disappointment if the first man you ever meet is Flynn Rider, and then every other man you meet after that is not Flynn Rider.
I think in that situation, Liam, you've still met Flynn Rider. When I was at Disneyland, I think the Flynn Rider lookalike was the one I found the most disappointing. And maybe it's because it's CGI, Flynn is the one who's sort of closest to what a real person looks like. But I think CGI Flynn Rider sets a high bar for handsome man.
I can't believe that was more disappointing than when the Gaston refused to eat 5 dozen eggs. And so Rapunzel and Flynn head to the city, and on their way they bump into Maximus, who, determined not to let justice go undone, is just ready to take down Flynn. And Rapunzel appeals to Maximus in a very sweet little scene and agrees that, hey, after 24 hours you can have him. But just for today, I need him. It's my birthday. He's showing me the floating lanterns. And so our team head to the city, and this is Rapunzel's first interaction with like bustling civilian life, and it's very cool. She's very overwhelmed immediately, is constantly getting in people's way, and obviously the hair is a big factor. Flynn notices this. He sees some young girls braiding each other's hair and enlists their help, and I think this is very, very sweet. I love the reaction where the girls just turn around and see this 100 foot of hair and their jaws just drop. And my word, the braiding is just beautiful. Like what they do with her hair, it does solve that problem of, hey, for this third act, she's not going to have the hair, in her way or be using it as a tool, but it looks wonderful. The only problem I have with it is the flower dance sequence is also a sequence in Kingdom Hearts 3, and it was the last trophy I got in that game, because getting the high score in that minigame is absolutely frustrating, and it's really tarred my experience of watching this sequence.
Well, once again, I feel I'm in a better position because I've not played Kingdom Hearts.
I mean, everyone who's not played Kingdom Hearts is in that position. It's a much better position, trust me.
Well, I would say this is my favourite sequence in the film, and I'd say this is one of my favourite Disney sequences, period. And I'm going to tell you why. So, first off, there's no dialogue in this sequence. What this is basically a montage of Flynn and Rapunzel exploring the market town and the preparations for the lantern ceremony. So, some of this is Flynn avoiding the guards, etc., and him and Maximus having a bit of banter, but the majority of this is Flynn and Rapunzel spending time doing all these fun things, getting food, seeing the sights. He buys her a little commemorative lantern flag, and I think this does so much so well because, first off, I think the music in this is superb. Alan Menken's really lent into having like a medieval style dance piece of music going on here. It feels like contemporary music of the time rather than, as we said, the Disney Channel. It establishes this relationship. It has Flynn see the world through Rapunzel's eyes, where she has all this wonder and joy from the world. He's always seen it in a very cynical way, and suddenly he says, actually, there's some beauty in this. And the centerpiece of it is Rapunzel just gets everyone dancing, which sounds so simple, but also it shows up her character so well. Everyone's so busy and kind of serious and miserable, and the way Rapunzel sees the world is there's so much joy in the world, so she gets everyone dancing. And it ends with this amazing dance sequence, which Rapunzel and Flynn keep trying to end up with each other as partners, but they get pulled away, or the flow of the dance goes a different way and ends up with the two of them together. I think it's faultless. I absolutely adore this sequence. I think it would make a terrible minigame.
And this sequence leads into yet another big sequence of the film where, after all the hustle and bustle of this dance number, the film just quietens down, the pace drops, and we're about to get the lantern ceremony. And we get Flynn and Rapunzel getting into a boat and heading out into the lake. And Rapunzel asking where they're going, and Flynn says, hey, once in a lifetime experience, you want the best seats. And then we cut to the king and queen taking the first lantern. They walk outside. It's twilight now. Everything's dark. And they light the first lantern and let it loose. And then we get this wide shot of the city. And as that first lantern goes up, we see snaking through the city all the other lanterns lighting up and being let loose into the sky until eventually we just get this huge swath of lanterns being released. And I'm going to say, I've not been entirely truthful with you in the past. I've referred to my favourite sequence of animation being the colour fight scene in Sleeping Beauty. To me, animation is about bringing to life the impossible in a way that just can't be done in live action. And I adore that sequence. I think as far as 2D animation goes, it's the best example of what I think animation can achieve and should be used for. However, it's not my favourite piece of animation ever. That has to go to this sequence. The lanterns in this gets me every time. It's absolutely gorgeous, and it can only be done in animation, and it's one of those moments where I'm like, this had to be computer animated. The Princess and the Frog was gorgeous and it worked wonderful in that medium. Tangled would not work in that medium. There are moments in Tangled that are only possible with the framing and the lighting that you can achieve with 3D rendering, and this sequence is absolutely gorgeous and is hands down the best piece of animation in my opinion.
First off, I'll add that to the hypocrite bingo card. But yeah, I think the back-to-back of the market dance sequence into the lantern sequence is the most powerful and effective double whammy scene we've had since Dumbo, from baby mining to pink elephants. Which, very different tonally, but again, they're two very impactful sequences. One thing I particularly love is the King and Queen. They have no dialogue in this film. Everything is expressed visually, and the heartbreak in the way they're animated is stunning. But yeah, this is very much this film saying, we're going to try and take on a whole new world for most romantic, powerful, emotional Disney sequence between a prince and a princess.
Because yeah, that's what this sequence is. This is the big number of the film. We get our duet between our leads, I See the Light, and I love this song. It makes me well up every time. Again, I'm not sure how much of that is the animation around the lanterns and just how strikingly beautiful it looks. The lighting in this, it's amazing.
I saw this at the cinema, and this is worth the ticket price. Just watching this sequence on the big screen, it is beautiful.
I've never seen it in the cinema, and I was going to make that point that I really want to. Like, we still get reissues of things like The Lion King, so if you want to see the Stampede sequence, just wait 5 years. The opportunity will arrive somewhere in a city near you, because they're always reshowing that. I don't see places reshowing Tangled much yet, and I want to go, and I want to see this in 3D even. I just want to sit there as this just fills the room. You've got the light on the characters, the subtle changes, because obviously it's lanterns and they are flickering. The subtle changes on the skin tones of the character is beautiful. The reflection. They did not need to make this as hard as they made it, and they executed it perfectly.
The bit that always gets me, so there's a moment where Rapunzel's leaning out over the boat to see the lanterns, and it cuts to Flynn and he just smiles at her, and it says, yep, we're seeing Rapunzel as he now sees her, which feeds in perfectly from the previous scene. But the moment that always gets me is when Rapunzel turns around and Flynn's got 2 lanterns for them to light. And you're like, Flynn Rider, you 10 out of 10 man.
I'm genuinely getting a little bit emotional thinking about that. I think it's done so well. We can see the light just flicker slightly on the side of Rapunzel's cheek, which is what clues her into the fact that, what's this behind me? She turns around and the 2 lanterns are there. And oh my God, it's beautiful. I love this sequence. It's so good.
I don't really want to talk about the rest of the film now. Can we just talk about this sequence for longer?
No, we've got to move on, which means we're back with Gothel and the Stabbingtons. It's a great name.
Yeah. I mean, you can't imagine as many Dr. Stabbingtons, right? It only lends yourself to being a criminal thug.
One thing I love about this sequence, and as a result this film, is our protagonist has achieved their want. She set out wanting to see the lanterns. She didn't know what would happen if she saw the lanterns. She didn't know if there'd be an answer to all the questions she has. She just wanted to see the lanterns, and she's done it. And she even says beforehand that she's scared to do this, because what if achieving her dream isn't what she thought it would be? And Flynn responds with just a beautiful line, which is just that's the best part. You get to find a new dream, which is so lovely. And I just really enjoyed that Disney gave our protagonist a really simple want and let her achieve it, because as we all know, it's never really about the want, it's about the need. So just let her have it.
But of course, things are never that simple. So Rapunzel gives Flynn the crown, saying she's not scared anymore, she trusts him. Almost immediately after receiving it, he sees a green glow from the coast and the Stabbington brothers staring at him, and he realises he needs to get rid of this weight around his neck so he can be with Rapunzel. Of course, that doesn't go to plan at all. He tries to give them the crown, but they decide they want the girl with the magic hair. And after leaving Rapunzel, saying, yeah, I've got something I need to deal with, he never comes back. The Stabbington brothers come back and say, Flynn's done a runner, and we see him sailing off, and they decide they're going to take Rapunzel instead. I mean, from their perspective, take the crown as well. Like, no reason not to.
Seeing Flynn sail away with the crown, even though we know what's happening, is still genuinely heartbreaking because we're seeing it from Rapunzel's point of view. It's like, I don't want her to have to see this.
Look away, Rapunzel, look away.
But luckily, to save the day, just as Rapunzel is about to be kidnapped by these ruffians and barbarians, Gothel shows up, knocks them out, and saves Rapunzel. She doesn't even have to chime in with a "I told you so," because Rapunzel jumps in ahead and is like, "You told me so," and is like, I know, it's okay, let's go home."
This sequence does have an example of it happened off screen, don't question it, is how on earth did Mother Gothel knock out both of the Stabbington brothers? Because that was always her plan, but that was never their plan, right? They were like, oh, we get to keep the girl with the magic hair. It just happens off screen, and then, just to be clear, like, it clearly wasn't their plan, because the next time we see them, they're in prison.
Speaking of prison, we see what became of Flynn Rider. We see the boat he was on, and we see that he's actually tied up to the mast and to the steering wheel with the crown tied to his hands, being delivered to the guards, which is not suspicious at all, but they're like, hey, he's a wanted man, that's the crown, we'll take him and arrest him anyway.
I mean, to be fair, that's what Batman and Spider-Man usually do. Just leave them unconscious and tied up with the loop.
Do they think it was Maximus who arranged this then? Is this his MO? That or some cows.
For a second, I was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, oh, you're referencing Home on the Range. What are you talking about?
And yeah, Flynn is promptly arrested. We see him the next day being taken to hang. Look, it's capital punishment. And I'm just saying that I'm going to take the king and queen being beloved by all with a bit of a pinch of salt here, because it turns out that, you know, treason results in death. So yeah, I'd love the king and queen.
They're beloved by all their living subjects.
Why should we help you get the flower? We all should have the flower. Well, if you don't help us.
Can the flower cure being hanged? I don't think it can, so...
Let's just pull it up just to make sure it doesn't, though. There's a moment I really like where Flynn is being taken to the gallows and he sees the Stabbingtons and he's like, where is she? What did you do? And they say, it wasn't us. It was, I think they even say the old lady, which is a point I really like that throughout the film Gothel ages. It's so subtle, but I think in every scene she's in after she first leaves Rapunzel, she has a slightly different character model. And I compare that to the turkey bathing in his suit. The turkey mayor from Chicken Little. Not earlier in this film. Where it's like, it's those small little attentions to detail that sell the world that you're building. And I think it's wonderful. And what I love about this is that Flynn immediately realizes that Rapunzel is in danger. He doesn't think she's in immediate, oh no, she's going to be hurt danger. It's, I've spent time with this woman. She's told me about her situation. She's being raised by an abusive narcissist. And she's finally been given freedom and she's having that taken away from her. I have to save her. And it's strange because obviously it's played very much like, oh no, if I don't escape immediately, someone's going to kill Rapunzel. But there's quite a bit more nuance to that. It's just someone I care about is being taken back to a situation that is awful for them. And I can't have that. And I'm the only one who knows about it to stop it.
Alongside this, we see Rapunzel and Gothel at home, and Gothel's immediately gone back to her gaslighting and undermining everything Rapunzel's done. She literally says, it never happened, which is one of the most gaslighty things you can say. And Rapunzel's so depressed, and then she takes out the little sun flag and realises she's been subconsciously painting this sun symbol her whole life. And it makes her realise she's the lost princess, and Gothel's been treating her like shit. And she finally stands up to Gothel and says, I'm not going to do what you tell me anymore. So Gothel decides she's going to be the bad guy, and everything goes dark. Which again is the image with Gothel. Gothel is very much linked with the darkness. Rapunzel's very much linked with the light in this film. Very, very, very simple fairy tale character building, but it works visually.
What I love about this resolution is that Rapunzel figures it out herself. And yeah, there's a fairly large leap of logic of, I've seen this symbol before in my subconscious, but what it really represents is she's experienced the world, she's interacted with the outside world and seen that it's not the horrible place that Gothel warned her about, and so she's questioning everything. And she's like, well, how could I be raised in this horrible situation? I don't understand it. And then the pieces fall into place. It's like the lanterns, remembering the symbol, having a horrible abusive mother. I'm not supposed to be here. I am the princess. I really like it. I love that she's the one that comes to the realization, as opposed to Flynn coming to her rescue and saying, you're the lost princess. We need to get you out of here.
And this is part of Rapunzel's need versus her want. So her want was to see the lanterns. What she needs is to be independent and away from Gothel. As part of this, Gothel says that Flynn will be executed, and we head back to his impending death.
But just as he's walking to the door of the gallows, we see
a Blade Runner reference.
I suppose we do, yeah. We see the little unicorn, which is a reference to I Have a Dream, and we realise that the barbarians are here to save Flynn. Maximus, being the world's greatest detective, pieced together that something wasn't right when he saw Flynn being arrested and went off to get help in the form of the barbarians.
Again, proving once again it's incredibly easy to break into this castle. Because several wanted criminals do it, no problem.
And yeah, we get this really nice action sequence with the various barbarians incapacitating guards. The mime is terrifying, obviously, but hey, it works, it's fun. And the bit I really like is the Brad Garrett barbarian puts Flynn on a cart and says, shoulders back, head down, knees apart. And it's at this point that Flynn's like, wait, knees apart? Why? And then another barbarian jumps, sending Flynn flying through the air, screaming the whole time, only to land on Maximus. It's just a wonderful bit of physical comedy.
So Maximus and Flynn race back to the tower to rescue Rapunzel. I will give the writers this credit, if nothing else. They managed to make the line, Rapunzel, let down your hair, be part of the dramatic denouement of this film, because Flynn desperately shouts it to the tower to see if Rapunzel's still there and if she's safe. Well played, Disney. Well played.
Before watching it this most recent time, I thought I didn't like this line because it felt like it was written in because it's the line. Weirdly enough, it reminded me of, I went to see Hamlet a few years back, and when it came to the play within the play, and the Queen says, I think the lady doth protest too much, methinks, the crowd just whooped and roared, and I was like, really? And it felt more like, don't get me wrong, that's a zing in Hamlet, but it felt more like a cheer of recognition. It's the Bart Simpson's meme of say the thing, and I always worried that Rapunzel let down your hair was a say the thing moment. But my word, if it's not Zachary Levi's performance that sells it as not being that, like it works. He's desperate, and it's like, you've got to let me in, are you in there? And that's the way you do it. It's wonderful.
I'm sure you can imagine I'm generally not a big fan of say the thing that the thing is famous for. Although I'm looking forward to discussing the sexiest character.
And so Rapunzel lets down her hair. Flynn heroically climbs it in true Disney Prince fashion, only to get to the tower, see that Rapunzel is bound and gagged in the corner, and Flynn just then gets stabbed with the world's quickest cleaning knife.
So Flynn's dying. Gothel's a pretty damn good shot with the old stiletto knife. Rapunzel gives Gothel a deal of she will keep fighting her entire life to get away from her, but she promises she'll go back to being an obedient daughter if Gothel lets her save Flynn's life, which Gothel reluctantly agrees to. And we get what I think is one of, if not the best example of our two protagonists having their need moment happen at the same time, because Rapunzel's need is she pushes away from Gothel and realises that she wants Flynn in her life, so she goes to save him. And Flynn, who starts the film being selfish, realises that the only way he can save Rapunzel is to cut her hair so that she's no use to Gothel anymore, even in the process killing himself, which is a gorgeous sequence.
I love this finale. I really enjoy that there is no physical confrontation. Obviously, Flynn heading to the tower, I don't want to see this athletic man beat up this 700-year-old woman.
Well, I'd quite like to see that. That's not far off the end of The Emperor's New Groove, to be fair.
And I really enjoy that he goes there to physically save her, but he's immediately taken out of action. But it is him going that allowed her to be saved, i.e. with, as well, it sets up the sacrifice, which is so wonderfully done. I know people like to talk about the fact that Flynn is the world's greatest hairdresser at this point.
I also think this is quite an unexpected moment. I don't know about you, but the first time I watched this film, I was like, oh, it's set it up that she's going to heal him and then there'll be some Disney magic or he'll save her or whatever. The haircut, I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. And I don't know why, because really it's the only way this film can resolve, right? Rapunzel can't keep having magic hair forever, but I was a bit shocked the first time.
You say that, but in the sequel TV series, she does grow back the magic hair.
Well, this is another parallel with Beauty and the Beast where you want to do more stuff with it, but a prequel, the characters haven't met, and a sequel, the characters aren't in the form that you want them. So you have to come up with corner cases and other ways you can justify doing it.
I'm surprised how surprised I was by this, because they set up the cutting the hair right at the start of the film. You cut the hair, it loses its magic. Okay, by the end of this film, the hair will be cut. And yet when it happens, I'm just like, oh my god.
So you were surprised by how surprised you were. So you went, I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting to be so surprised. So with the haircut, the magic is broken, and Gothel kind of has an Indiana Jones thing where she just ages incredibly quickly. We only sort of half see it through her pulling her hood over and some fractured reflections, which I think is quite a nice way to imply something horrifying. And then she sort of is tripped out of the tower and falls, and by the time the cloak lands, there's nothing left in it. It's just frittered away. Even though this is quite a horrific sequence, I guess she does technically die of old age.
She's certainly not dragged to hell.
Not literally, anyway.
Though I will say it happens very differently in Kingdom Hearts, where at some point during the fall, she transforms into a giant monster that you can fight. Because, I mean, you can't have a boss fight against a frail old woman.
Again, Liam, you and I disagree on that.
I mean, you have a boss fight with Lady Tremaine, and that's fine. Beating her up with a big key. In regards to Gothel falling, though, I'm glad she did wither into nothing on the way down, because otherwise, like, Pascal was fully intending for this woman to just hit the ground and die.
He has a bit of a Bernard moment, doesn't he, where it's like, he's technically not responsible for this death. I'll try doing an edit of Bernard killing Gothel, but I think the animation styles are too different. Now, whilst I do love the hair cut, we do get the classic magic tears. If you want something enough, someone can come back to life. The magic of the drop from the gods is saved in Rapunzel's tears, which drop onto Flynn and do save his life. Which, again, I'm moaning about it. What did I want? Just Flynn to die and Rapunzel to be heartbroken? Obviously not.
Yeah, I mean, the other option was the magic was in her all along, but that's a terrible ending where it's like, oh good, now she can be kidnapped by someone else and just made to cry on them every day. I quite like the ending. It's emotionally manipulative, like Gothel herself, but in a good way, I suppose, where our two characters they're talking to each other much like how they did in the cave, like accepting death. And again, Flynn is very accepting of this, but Rapunzel is reluctant, and she's the one like, I've got to do something. She's desperately singing the song and having Flynn grip her now cropped hair, and obviously she cries. And they say to each other, and it's a lovely moment that gets me every time, where I think it's Flynn says to Rapunzel first that she was his new dream, and she responds that he was hers. And I really like that because, yeah, this is the first time where we've had a character meet their wants and in extension in the here have their need met, but they get to find something else, and it is a natural relationship build up. Yeah, it's a few days. It's still a whirlwind romance, but as you say, there's not that initial attraction. It's a very fluid build-up of this relationship, and this is a climax where, like, hey, Flynn is dying, and he says that all he wanted was to be with her and for her to be free. And Rapunzel cries, and the cry brings him back to life, which I love. I love the animation on the sunflower power growing out of his wound. We also get a bit of blood. I completely forgot about this. We see that Flynn has a bloody shirt on. No blood on the knife, but blood on the shirt. It's nice to know where the film classification boards sit on your U rating.
This is almost identical to the stabbing in Beauty and the Beast, where I don't think Gaston's knife has any blood, but you see blood on the shirt.
This is just the end of Beauty and the Beast, isn't it?
Oh, for sure.
I hadn't even realised.
Evil stab, villain falls to their death, hero dies, heroine cries, they come back to life with magic.
Except unlike Gothel, Gaston definitely hit the floor.
I mean, it depends how deep that is, because if it just goes forever, I suppose he'd die of old age.
Just goes straight to hell.
And then we cut forwards to Flynn returning Rapunzel to her parents. Again, I think this sequence is so much better for there not being dialogue. Rapunzel shares the striking green eyes of her mother, and the three of them hug. And then there's a really sweet moment where they reach out to Flynn and bring him into the hug as well, which, again, visually tells you so much. Flynn is forgiven for his crimes. He's welcomed into the family. Flynn has found a family. Obviously, you know, he's an adult, but he was an orphan who never had this, so that is meaningful to him as well. And then we go back to Flynn's narration, kind of just wrapping everything up with all the various side characters.
Well, we say side characters, it's just mostly the barbarians and Maximus.
Okay, I need to talk about Maximus here. So it's kind of meant to be, after this, they lived happily ever after. Everything was sorted out. The barbarians all got to follow their dream. Pascal got to eat some fruit. And it says Maximus eliminated crime overnight, and there's kind of the implication that he's introduced frying pans as a weapon. But a couple of things here. One, Maximus was already very, very competent at dealing with crime. When we say dealt with crime overnight, given we know how crime is dealt with in this kingdom, I assume they just meant, oh, and then Maximus had the Stabbington brothers hanged.
Well, I was about to say, we don't see the Stabbington brothers in this epilogue.
No, so it seems like all the criminals were either forgiven and integrated back into society or hanged.
Yes.
I don't know that Flynn did that much more than the Stabbington brothers to resolve this situation.
It's a bit of fun. It ties in with the narration and the character of Flynn, and I'll take it over a dance party ending any day. Though I have mixed feelings about whether I'd take a dance party over a small bearded man dressed as Cupid in his pants, yeah.
Just leering at you. Ugh. And then we get a nice little thing of Flynn implying that Rapunzel was desperate to marry him, but actually he was the one who asked her, which again, I genuinely think that's how it would go, and that Flynn would be the one to ask that. So yeah, I think it's a nice little moment. Yeah,
I've seen people state that this is, you know, that cynicism of the revival of like, hey, they're making a point that, you know, she was asking, and because we can't just have, and we got married and lived happily ever after. But I think it's less cynicism and more just the smarmy charm of Flynn. And I really like it. Of course he'd make a joke about it. It's his narration. He's having fun.
Yeah, it's a really clean way of ending. Again, I'm not big on narration, and I feel this, perhaps more than any Disney film, says, look, everything is wrapped up.
Don't ask about the Stabbingtons.
Yeah, it's literally a character just saying, here's how everything got sorted. And that is Tangled.
Very, very quickly, I will say I loved the song over the end credits. I think part of that is helped by the absolutely gorgeous artwork that assists it. It's very stylized. It reminds me almost of a Quentin Blake style artwork. It's really expressive and very beautiful with these just gorgeous watercolors over the credits, and it's so full of character, and I wonder how much of it is actual storyboards that they had from that stage of the planning. Again, they will have been, you know, redone and amplified for use in the film, but in terms of what we're seeing, like how much of this is what the animators will have seen at the early stage. Whoever, I tried looking up who was responsible for the end credit art, but I couldn't find it, and it's absolutely gorgeous and one of my favourites as far as the credit art goes.
So we've gone through the entire plot, and I think it's about time for us to pass our final judgment. But before we do, Liam, is there anything else we need to discuss regarding Tangled?
There is just one thing, and I think we're going to have a fairly easy time of it this week, because, as always, we need to decide which character in Tangled we think is the sexiest character. As always, we're referring to characters that we feel are unnecessarily or excessively sexualized in an otherwise family entertainment film. And my word, it's just a gift given to us this week, because we're going to have our very own hot guy meeting and explain why Flynn Rider is not only the sexiest character in this film, but potentially one of the sexiest characters in Disney.
I totally echo that, and I'm actually really glad we've got an easy choice, because next week I know we're not going to have an easy choice, because it's another bloody Winnie the Pooh film. So it's very nice to have Flynn Rider. He very clearly was workshopped by how can we make just an incredibly sexy, handsome man, and he's great.
I do enjoy, though, that whenever you focus group sexy men, you just get the video game protagonist of tall, white, brunette with a bit of facial hair.
Yeah, he's just Nathan Drake, isn't he? He steals artifacts and climbs old buildings. And he's double-crossed by his criminal associates. Man, he really is Nathan Drake. Jeez.
Do you think one person brought in just a picture of Nathan Drake?
Pointed at it.
And with that fairly easy addition to our sexiest character list, we have one of a list we need to deal with. We need to decide whether or not we think Tangled deserves a spot on the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. Fearing our very own ruffians and thugs in the form of Dinosaur and Chicken Little wanting to soil our list, we've taken to hiding it in the tallest tower in the most secretive glade. But I think we can retrieve it today as we climb the wall, open the vault, and retrieve the list. Ben, shall I write Tangled on the list?
I've given a lot of praise to this film throughout this podcast, and there are a lot of things I love about this film.
Good. That sounds good enough to me.
Some of the humour and cynicism doesn't quite gel for me, and that is definitely a mark against it. Revisiting this film, the big question for me was, post-Frozen and Moana, which I think are very much the evolution of Tangled, does Tangled still have a place on this list? Do I think those films do what Tangled's doing better? Or likewise, Tangled being a modern version of films like Beauty and the Beast and The Little Mermaid, does Tangled do enough to stand out from those? Yeah, it does. Tangled's great. I love Tangled. I love Flynn and Rapunzel. As I say, I don't think it's the most complex and challenging film of the Disney revival, but I also don't think it has to be. In much the same way The Little Mermaid kick-started the Disney Renaissance. The Little Mermaid in a lot of ways is a simple film, but what it does exceptionally well. I don't think Tangled is quite at that level. I certainly wouldn't put it in my, say, top 3 Disney films, but I definitely think it does enough. I think the story's solid, there's some good jokes, the music's good, and visually it's stunning. If nothing else, for the double whammy of the market dance sequence into the lantern sequence, it would really have to mess a lot of other stuff up to not deserve a place. So for me, it's a big fat yes.
I'm happy to cut to the chase and say that I'm in complete agreement, and this is 100% going on the list. And I just want to add that you may have noticed throughout this podcast that I've mentioned a lot of times about like my favourite elements across the series. We've got my favourite bit of animation, my favourite Disney horse and Disney sidekicks. This is my favourite Disney princess. It's my favourite love interest. I would say this is going into my top 3 films. In fact, and you already knew this, Ben, before we went into this, but Tangled is my number 1 Disney film because I think it is a perfect film. I think everything it sets out to do, it achieves perfectly. It's so simple and it's so beautiful. The cynicism and the humour, for me, all lands. I can understand why for some people it doesn't, but every joke in this film lands for me. Every eyebrow raise of Flynn works for me, which is something that is not going to be the case for many of the revival films coming up. I think what Tangled got right, future films like Frozen and Moana repeated in ways that didn't work as well. This is a perfect film for me, and it is absolutely my favourite Disney film of all of them. So yes, this is going on the list. And with that, I will happily write in incredibly large letters, Tangled, and accompanying it with a little heart doodle with pictures of my two favourite Disney romantic leads. I'm very happy for this to be on the list.
You've got the nose right, so well done. So, Tangled is the first film in quite a while to make the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. As always, thank you so much for listening to our ramblings on this Disney film. We're always keen to know what your thoughts are. Is Tangled one of your favourites? Do you think the Disney revival meets or even exceeds the Disney Renaissance? Or is Tangled one that just kind of passed you by and doesn't quite click for you? We're always keen to know what your thoughts are. Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics is available on SoundCloud, Spotify, a selection of other podcast hosting platforms, and of course a special enhanced version on YouTube, where we also post edits, memes, interviews, and various other bits of content relating to Disney and indeed animated films in general. And speaking of Disney animated films, there are always more films to talk about. So Liam, which film are we looking at next time?
Next time, Ben, we're going back to the 100 Acre Wood because that's right, we've got yet another sequel. Well, this is less a sequel compared to something like Rescuers Down Under and very much just kind of a revisit of the world because the continuity of Winnie the Pooh is very loose to say the least because, yep, we're looking at 2011's Winnie the Pooh. A film I'm very interested to revisit because after our last discussion of Winnie the Pooh, I realised that we have very different opinions on this character. And I'm wondering whether a second stab from the studio might break that cynicism or wear me down on tweeness. So I'm very excited to go back and visit this. And with that, all that's left to say is thank you very much for listening. Remember to give Winnie the Pooh a watch and join us next time for Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics.